Hello, everyone. So welcome to the webinar. We'll just wait a few minutes until more people log on, but thanks for being here. Hi, John.
Hey, can you hear me okay? Audio check good?
Yes, audio check perfect.
Right. Thank you.
And hey, everyone, great to see you. Please feel free to write in the chat where you're from. We're very excited to have you all on board for this masterclass. All right, let's kick it off. So first of all, welcome to all of you. We are very excited to have you here. This is our first GFA Monitor Masterclass on respectful and secure work environments. And to begin with, I'm the host of this masterclass. My name is Christina. I'm head of innovation and academy here at Global Fashion Agenda. So the academy, the GFA Academy, is our educational pillar at GFA, where we try to inspire and lead and learn and guide people towards more a sustainable approach in the industry. And besides having masterclasses, which this is the first one we'll kick off, we also have our innovation forum that consists of sustainable solution providers. We have our designer challenges, where we also, together with designers and creative directors, give them challenges within sustainability. And we have our youth program, where we work with the next generation in order to make a better industry on cross of everything. So again, really excited to have you here. And I want to introduce you to my really lovely colleague, Felicity, who's our sustainability manager, because she will directly take you into the GFA Monitor, which this is the first priority that this masterclass is about. So Felicity, are you there?
Yep. Hi, Christina. Thanks so much for the kind introduction, and welcome everyone to today's session. My name is Felicity. I am the Sustainability Manager at Global Fashion Agenda, and I largely work on the research and writing of our core publications. And today I'll just be kicking off with a short introduction to our latest publication, the GFA Monitor, and the topic of respectful and secure work environments to really set the scene for today's panel discussion. Next slide, please. Perfect. So yeah, last year we launched our first GFA Monitor publication, and this is really intended as an industry resource to guide fashion leaders towards our vision of a net positive fashion industry. And how we define this industry is a fashion industry which puts back more into society, the environment, and the global economy than it takes out. The GFA Monitor really builds on our existing Fashion CEO Agenda priority framework, outlining areas where we believe bold and urgent action needs to take place. Really an A to Z sustainability manual on how to take action today. And going forward, we really hope this will act as an annual gauge for industry progress. And just to mention now, the GFA Monitor is freely downloadable on the GFA website. So if you haven't already downloaded the report, then please do check it out after this session. Next slide. Great. So to really bring together credible industry guidance in the GFA Monitor, we engaged over 20 really amazing industry organizations to understand current industry progress, where action still really needs to take place, and also the existing tools and programs that can support the industry in really actioning on their sustainability agendas. Higg, our data partner, also provided us with aggregated performance data to really measure industry progress. We have 5 impact partners, each who head up one priority area, and also a wider group of principal stakeholders who really supported the co-creation of the GFA Monitor in their respective knowledge fields. We also have our strategic and our associate partners who provided best practices in the form of case studies throughout the report. Next slide. Great. So for those of you not familiar with our core publications, the GFA Monitor, as I mentioned, really builds on the Fashion CEO Agenda 5 priority framework. And the actions that we outline here are the respectful and secure work environments, better wage systems, resource stewardship, smart material choices, and circular systems. Next slide. And here you can just see a snapshot from our executive summary to really see how we've designed the priority chapters in the report. So firstly, we define and give context to each of the priority areas, why that priority area is important, what are the potential opportunities that this priority area presents for the industry, and also the key actions that we believe the industry must take in order to reach that net positive fashion industry. Next slide. So today's focus is on respectful and secure work environments. And within this priority area, we provide guidance on how to uphold human rights for all people employed along fashion's value cycle. And and we'll discuss this more in today's session, while we see great progress being made amongst fashion's leaders in improving working conditions, contractual agreements, occupational health and safety, and much more. We also know that a lot more action really needs to take place if we are to secure respectful working environments for all workers. So in the report, we outline 4 key areas for action. These include the adoption and implementation of responsible purchasing practices, driving equality and empowerment, improving the terms of employment, and also implementing and developing key social protection systems. Next slide. Thanks. So to really help the industry in implementing these actions that we outline in the report, we guide the reader towards existing key credible industry resources and tools in order to support that implementation process, as well as provide tangible case studies of best practices of actors already in this space driving improvements. Next slide. Great. So lastly, we also, within the report, we tap into the ever-changing legislative environment, really preparing the industry for upcoming changes in policy and what to be aware of in the coming years, as well as a deep dive into current industry progress, looking at the primary data that already exists and highlighting where the industry currently stands in this priority area. So next slide, but I will finish here. As I mentioned, please do go to the GFA website. The report is freely downloadable, so please do go and check it out. But I will now hand back over to Christina and enjoy the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicity, for the very good overview of the report. I just want to mention that the chat is now enabled, so you can use it. And if you have any questions for the panelists or for the session or in general, please put them in the chat and we will have a Q&A in the end of the session. And with that being said, I have Faith next to me, my colleague, who's the moderator of this session. So Faith.
Thank you. Excellent. So we've had an overview of the GFA Monitor tool from Felicity. And before we jump into this panel, which will aim to bring to light a lot of the information in that document, I'm going to invite Janet from Social and Labour Convergence Programme, who's been a big part of powering the content within the GFA Monitor, to just set the scene a little more with a very short introduction to your work. And then we'll jump into the panel discussion altogether. So Janet, I'd love to hand over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so maybe we jump in immediately in what SLCP is, and I promise I keep it short because probably we have a mix of people in the audience. Some know about SLCP, some don't. But what I really like to, apart from a quick summary on what we do, try to get across is, say, the power of convergence, working together, how that can create impact, and how also the data that we can generate from there, how we can use that to really drive change. So, and with that, on the next slide, I have that first example. We first jump, into a bit of the context why we are working together with the GFA. So we work on basically two priorities on the GFA agenda that Felicity highlight. And we also contributed to the monitor, and we've been in great partnership and collaboration, and I believe we really complement each other, GFA and SLCP, and really also looking forward to continue that collaboration. So, and the next slide, that's the slide that I wanted to show to kick us off, because that really shows what Felicity was already saying. We really have a lot to still do. So SLCP has gained momentum. We have quite a lot of people who have started to use it. We have a pool of data, and what we found from the 2021 impact report is that more than 90% of all the facilities, and those were more than 4,400, there is at least one or more legal non-compliance. So we're not talking about aspirational goals, but really about the minimum related to national labor law. And we find the non-compliances mostly in the areas of health and safety, working hours, and wages and benefits. So that to set the scene. And then really briefly, I'll run through it a bit about SLCP and what it is. You see that on the next slide. Oh, okay, so I was expecting another slide, but this is okay as well. We are an organization, multi-stakeholder organization. We are supported by signatories, and what we do is really implement what we call a converged assessment framework that we've created with our more than 250 signatories. We have started implementation in 2019, and we have grown since then, and we last year managed to work with more than 7,000 factories who implemented the converged assessment framework, and this year we will grow to 11,000. With that, what we want to achieve is reduce audit fatigue, everyone to use the same set of data, generating credible and actionable data that can drive insights and improvements, and reallocate resources from audits towards improvements. You'll see that we have quite a global coverage. It's more than 50 countries where the factories using the converged assessment framework are based. And also sometimes I hear that SLCP is only for the bigger factories. Well, I think we're quite diverse, and you see that in reality, almost 50% of the assessments is done in small and medium-sized enterprises. Let's move to the next slide for a bit more info. So this, I think, slide shows the momentum that we've been able to have. Though we are a young organization, and at the start, I think the industry was a bit cynical, like harmonization in audits. Is that really possible? And I think this proves it. More than 65 brands, retailers, and standard holders have now publicly committed that they are using the converged assessment framework rather than proprietary tools. So that's super encouraging. And on the next slide, maybe if you can move to that one, I wanted to also show that if we have a good framework and verified data, robust systems, you also need to have a way to share those data in a secure and scalable way. We have a sophisticated system for that with our partner ITC, and also what we call active accredited host platforms that are connected to a central repository. And Higg is one of them, and you'll hear more from John around that. But that's just essential in the way if we want to use the data. The next one, please. A little bit about the impact, and I encourage you to look at that more if you're interested in it. But as I said, if we're moving, and we see the evidence of that, moving resources from duplicative audits towards improvements, we are really able to now make reinvestments in workplace improvements. And we're partnering with the Better Buying Institute, and the second cycle that we've done now collectively, we really see that suppliers are confirming what was the original intention and purpose for SLCP. The next one, please. That is also the last one. So I think we're going to probably in the panel discussion really talk about the use of the data and how that can drive improvements. And this is a little bit of a summary of that. So in the first place, for a company, a business, they can use SLCP and the Convergence assessment framework as a solution in the implementation of, for instance, due diligence, so they can monitor the progress in their own supply chains and really from there make the improvements. On an aggregated level, we can use the data to get insights on where the industry is and where the priorities are in addressing those. And also lastly, all of this can inform stakeholders, including, for instance, policymakers, to drive also better policy enforcements, and in the end also on that way address the human rights needs. So with that, I think I hand over back to the GFA team.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Janet, just for laying that foundation that's going to really help us with an informed panel discussion now. So a quick hi from me to everyone watching. I'm Faith. I am here in Copenhagen, and I'm the head of content here at GFA. And my job here today is really to try and bring all of the work and passion that's within the GFA Monitor tool to life. And I'm lucky to have 4 really incredible expert voices who, through their own work experience, can really bring some insights for you today. So please use the chat. This is a great opportunity to interact, to get your head around anything that you might find confusing about this work, and to join the community, basically. So to start with, just before this panel, we use the word convergence a lot, and I just decided to just check up definition of it. And the simple definition is moving towards uniformity. And I think that's a really great theme to bring into this panel as we're looking towards what, Janet, you were talking about, everyone using the same set of data, for example, and everyone getting on board with the same processes to address this huge issue that we do keep talking about and have been working on for many years across the industry. So with that, let's start this panel. I am going to kind of introduce each speaker as I direct a question to them. So first, I'm going to head over to John. John's the Chief Technical Officer at Higg. And John, I wanted you to help us get started with some context. I know that you worked early on with the SLCP's infrastructure. And I know you're also quite excited about the traction that we're seeing within the brand community, especially in terms of using this framework. So could you talk to us a little bit about the shifts we're seeing and what role technology is playing in helping us address respectful and secure work environments?
Yeah, definitely. I think, all this is based on an insight that the SLCP had very early on, which is it wasn't enough to come up with a shared standard of content. You needed a technology platform behind that. That's been a really critical insight. And what we're seeing, that technology decision that was made early on create are some really interesting new opportunities. And the 3 that I pay attention to the most is we are seeing more and more brands come to us and talk about how they can leverage SLCP data. historically, a lot of those brands would not even have that conversation because social data can often be kept in a secure silo. It's a must-have, mission critical for a lot of these brands. And so historically, for them to give over any control or any ownership or any collaboration around that was really, really hard. And we're now seeing them proactively come to us to ask how they can get engaged. And that's a huge shift that's enabled by the technology, by them knowing that it's secure, it has high integrity, and that everything's working as they expect. So that's kind of on the new brand side. On the factory side, it's also really interesting. If you saw the last masterclass, Abhishek talked about this really critical component of the SLCP, which is the idea that the factory owns their own data. And that's a really big transformational aspect that the SLCP has brought to scale in the industry. And what that actually is it's a transfer of ownership of data from brand silos and lockboxes to the users and owners of that data, the facilities and factories that produce that data. The only reason that's possible is because of the technology that gives everybody trust in the system, right? They know that the SLCP will hold it securely, that the data is permissioned and everybody knows where the data is going and how it's getting there. That really robust and now scaled and battle-tested technology platform that the SLCP has built is giving everybody confidence to give that ownership, to relinquish control back to the factory. And that's really, really cool. And the final thing, just in the last 6 months that we're seeing now, technology start to trend out and where we see things going is historically what a lot of brands do is they'll take SLCP data from a factory and they'll convert it into their internal legacy formats. These are tools that they've been using for 10 or 20 years sometimes that they own. And so the SLCP was treated as a data feed, not as a fundamental part of their systems. They're now initiating conversations with us where they're saying, how can we now begin to just build our systems directly on top of SLCP data? They're starting to realize the benefit of shifting to a common standard for workflow, for performance improvement, and for things like cost savings internally, right? They trust this technology platform enough to begin to scale their efforts directly on top of that. And we'll talk more about it later, but us all sharing this common data and this common view, like Jeanette said, is so important for scaling all of this work. So those are 3 things I think that have changed because of the technology tools that the SLCP has brought to bear here.
Cool, thanks, John. I mean, we're definitely feeling an increased momentum, especially from the brand community in this topic, and that's been represented by how many people are joining this webinar and how many people have signed up. So thank you, everyone in the audience, for being here. And John, I liked some of your points in sort of shifting from those legacy formats to something that's a bit more unified. So I'll just now pass the stage to Ninh. Ninh, you're the Director of Responsible Sourcing and Sustainability at Target. So we're looking to you as the brand insight, the brand voice in this conversation. Do you agree with the things that that John's saying? And when it comes to scaling data collection from the supply chain at Target, where can brands like Target intervene to make these workplaces more respectful and secure?
Yeah, thanks, Faith, for bringing me in. I absolutely think John had some really great points. And I think for us as a brand, we've been working with SLCP for a number of years now. But we've also kind of been on our own convergence journey to really kind of move away from our proprietary tools. But I am very excited to see this shift from many brands, including small as well as large brands, really trying to move away from this. And it wasn't so much a way to kind of scale data collection for Target. It was really to think about how do we move away from our own proprietary tools in order to really help our supply chains focus on what matters the most, right? And that is helping drive a just and equitable supply chain. And so I think for us, the mission from what SLCP has been driving is really aligned to what we've been trying to do, and that's really trying to improve workers' lives and continuous improvement. I think the idea of shifting towards a very new ecosystem can be really daunting for many brands, because as a sustainability professional, many people are really into it. But I think the concern is, how do we do this in a way that we're going to be able to do this as a total company initiative, right? And so really, I think those are some of the things that we have to address as well. But I think the idea of once we start to do this, and I think Jeanette mentioned this as well, there's a little bit of cynicism at the beginning, and there's a lot of change management. But a lot of what John has mentioned is what we're seeing as well. We're seeing efficiency internally. We are actually seeing a lot of benefits when it comes to our ability to get more visibility into the supply chain. And so it allows us to also really try to unlock, honestly, insights that we may not have received before. But more importantly, going back to factories, it allows them to understand where their performance is as well. And so I do think that there is a huge adoption rate that's happening as well. But I do think that there's certainly more that we can do. But we did not come into this from a data collection perspective. It was really to see how can we shift our resources from just compliance to really capability building and supporting our supply chains as well. But what I'm really excited about, quite honestly, within this element of data is the partnerships that have come as well. So I think about better work, bringing other credibility. Jeanette mentioned better buying, as well as APSCA to really bring in other things as well. So as I think about the quality of data, that's what's been important for us, because it's not just about scaling of data, it's about the quality of information that we get, and can we trust it, and are we able to use this in an insightful way? So I think as I think about that element, hopefully that provides some insights into the question.
Yeah, thanks, Ninh. I feel like your point on quality really links to what John was saying around trust in these data sets, and really centering that on a just and equitable result as well, not getting too caught up in the process and just getting to work on this urgent task for sure. So Nikhil, I'm happy to introduce you. You're the ESG and sustainability consultant on our panel, a longtime friend and collaborator of GFA, and from a kind of manufacturer's point of view, does the manufacturer have to press their clients, brand clients, to be part of this? From your perspective, is it easy to move towards convergence? You know, what's blocking progress?
Yeah, I mean, hi everyone. It takes time. I think it's great. I think just want to echo what John had said, and I think the difference between SLCP is that we actually, as manufacturers, own the data, and it really sort of helps us to really understand to a certain extent how we are performing. It's not the traditional audit and audit system, and I think we then can really manage and really sort of understand. I think we're sort of seeing this convergence now between, I mean, I'm really a big fan of the whole ESG terminology, because I think really ESG really brings it all together. As a traditional factory, we looked at, for me, when I joined the business, and I've been involved in my family business for over 25 years, when I joined the business, it was very much around environment, and sustainability was all about environment, and then we had HR for the social. But I think this terminology has really now allowed us to really sort of bring it all together. I think the ESG terminology also has helped us, as it's being used now in valuations and other relationships with external stakeholders as well. And I think the SDG framework has also helped us to really understand it in a more simple way. And I think the G in element allows the G in ESG really helps with the convergence side, because it then really allows us to really, to a certain extent, put in a strategy, because governance is key. I mean, you can look at E and S as separate, but the G element allows and really sort of make sure that there is a strategy with clear KPIs. And I think we're all beginning to see the benefits of that in the industry. What I do think that needs to happen, though, is when you're looking at the two together, you need to really understand the impact of what E does. Some impacts when you take actions on an element of E, what it does on S. And I was at an event a couple of weeks ago talking about this, and I think we're beginning to see that there's a lot of focus on sustainable fashion, but that will have an impact on the social side as well, and the future. So I think that, you know, we need to really be clear on that going forward.
Thanks, Nikhil. Yeah, absolutely. And now just back over to Janet, maybe to respond to some of those points. Thanks so much, by the way, for sharing more about the SLCP. And for all of you, thanks for being part of the GFA Monitor. By the way, audience, it's free, download it. It's a tool full of more instructions and insights on all of this. Janet, could you tell us a little bit more about, we talked about data a lot, but could you just kind of like tell us how the current use of data is underpinning the fashion industry challenge on this topic today? You know, like in simple terms, how is this data unlocking progress?
I would say in different ways. So maybe to start with echoing what Ninh said about, say, that the crux is that we can trust the data. Is the data credible and actionable? And I think what we are trying to do, and that's a continuous journey, and we work with a lot of partners on that, but to ensure that we're asking the right questions, that we have the right checks and balances in place to ensure also the quality and the integrity of the data. But how it unlocks progress. So first and foremost, I think a unified, robust way of data collection verification, in a way that previously where manufacturers, and Nikhil can speak to that, were being asked 10, 20 times a year to do an almost similar audit. Huge resources were wasted by that. And if we can replace that by one single way to measure it and to be able to share the data in the way that we've just shown, that already can unlock a lot of resources that can be reinvested and reallocated towards capacity building programs, training programs, improvement programs. On the higher level, the fact that we have a unified tool, a unified system, also unified data, means we can compare apples with apples globally, but also can make analysis on that on tiers, products, countries, specific topics. All of that can help to get more streamlined understanding and insights. So the one slide that I was showing at the start just is a glimpse of what we can all do with that. And I think the way that we can unlock the insights, if we do that well in the right governance and the right understanding. For instance, if a company wants to use the data for their own supply chains, but you can also scale that to other areas. You can work with investors, with academia, get with the ILO governments, get the insights to understand where we are, where are the priorities, and also what are efficient ways to address that. We have done, I think, a lot of work in the past 25 years, but it's been a bit scattered and using a bit different tools. We now have a new opportunity with unified methodologies to come to the next level and to really use the data to drive improvements for all stakeholders.
Thanks.
And we've seen that it's really needed. Just repeating, 90% of the factories still not even compliant with the local law.
Yeah, I was kind of taken aback by that insight that you shared in the deck. And so I guess what you're saying is that uniformity in this way helps us all across the industry have the same reference points. And my main takeaway from your answer there is that when we're all speaking the same language, it really takes the pressure off manufacturers, especially, to keep speaking in 100 different languages and 100 different audits, right? Fantastic. Okay, so now I've got a few more questions I'd just like to ask the panelists to answer quite briefly now. Back to you, Ninh. From your experience, how has your corporate sustainability team efforts shifted as a result of some of these tools, perhaps towards supplier development?
I think this actually goes hand in hand. I think for Target, what we've always said is, in order for us to be able to really lean into capability building and supplier development, we need to make space. And so the common theme here is really, how do we do that with regard to supplier ownership? I think one of the interesting things that we've seen from a Target perspective is, we did ask our suppliers, how did this help impact you, right? Did you see some of that as well? one of the key questions is we asked our suppliers, and you may have heard this in the last conversation as well, is how did you reinvest some of this work into your own capability building? And nearly 80% of our top suppliers said that they reinvested back into management systems and capability building as well. And so that's a really positive sign for us when we start to think about supplier ownership. But I do think when we start to think about, other elements that aren't always so visible, we are able to kind of focus on other elements as well. And so I think that's one of the things that I'm really excited about. But I also think that there's room for improvement when it comes to additional capability building as well. And how do we really activate on some of that work? And, I look at Higg and the ability to do a lot of benchmarking, to do performance evaluation. It provides a really great baseline, but I think that for us has really kind of been a key insight. So it's driven supply ownership. It's given us a baseline for where performance can be and where can we help suppliers own their own information. But I would say that's those are a couple of things that I would highlight.
Thank you. Yeah, and that really bounces back to Nikhil, one of your points around owning the data. So I'll just go back to you, because in the prep call and in your what you were previously saying, you were really talking about the E, environment, and the S for social. So can you just speak a little bit more about that convergence and how you see that shift changing in the wider fashion sustainability movement?
Well, I think to a certain extent, I think we need to, obviously every industry is now looking at these sort of valuations in terms of when you look at the whole ESG. And I think, in terms of resources, retailers, we as a manufacturer now really putting that all together in terms of how we evaluate. And having been involved in both environmental and social sort of tools, I was on the board for the SAC for a while, been involved in SLCP. It really is becoming part of the norm now in terms of how you evaluate assessment in the factories. And as I say, I reiterate my point of what I said earlier in terms of as we also now begin to understand ourselves, how we can create impact and sort of going forward to what we need to do as a manufacturer and how we're going to survive in this new industry. And I think we need to cover all these aspects. I think the framework of the SDGs is a key aspect of all 17 relate to the apparel industry. So how as a manufacturer do we look at that?
Thanks. Yeah, I am fascinated about how a manufacturer would look at those 17 goals, because you're right, they are such a useful language, and sometimes it takes the experience of stepping outside of our fashion industry space to realize how useful that framework is. So Janet, when it comes to any interesting examples or experiences, case studies of what's happening now in terms of impact, got anything interesting to share there in terms of social sustainability, some nuanced insights from you?
Yeah, so as we now move in, say, the fourth, fifth year of operation, there are brands and manufacturers who have been using the tools and really can see the evidence of reduction of resources into audits and unlocking resources for improvement programs. So you've heard a bit from Nikhil, you've heard a bit from Ninh. We had done some also our own surveys among our signatories, also speaking to the same, and some manufacturers are already saving up to $20,000 US a year that they can reallocate. So imagine with how much is the potential with all the factories in the world if they would be on such a system. So that's turning into the hundreds of millions on an annual basis. I think that's how we, on that scale, that's how we need to start thinking about in order to address the big problems that we see. We are collecting those case studies, and also they are freely available. On top of it, we are doing, as I already quickly highlighted, we're working with the Better Buying Institute. They do these anonymous surveys on an annual basis, and there are some specific questions also related to SLCP. And also now we're seeing really some encouraging results that particularly the manufacturers who have been a bit on the losing end of this, they are seeing the benefits of unification, convergence.
Got it. I really like your point around the scale here and how if we zoom out, we can be really ambitious. And I think that really links to our mission here at GFA and what Felicity mentioned before around net positivity. I mean, these big ambitious views and the scale of our industry, we have to recognize it even when we're in these technical details. So I'd just like to remind everyone who's watching live, like please do share some of your experiences or reflections to what you're hearing. We'd love to get a little bit of feedback in terms of whether you agree, how new some of this terminology might be. Feel free to drop into the chat. But another question for you, John, when it comes to specific hotspots in the data, can you share any statistics or any case studies or insights there as well?
I don't think I can get too specific on anything, but what we do know looking at the data is, it may seem like obvious things, but it's important to be able to tell these things. Manufacturers that use the SLCP year over year do better year over year, like they continue to show improvement. And that's pretty much universal in our data set. We see things like if you're a manufacturer and you're using both a social and an environmental assessment, there's a statistical correlation between you doing multiple engagements and how you perform over time. That multiple assessment engagement creates situations where not only is worker engagement higher, but maybe wages and benefits, you're showing up better in that category as well. So there's these interesting knock-on effects from this kind of common engagement model across everything. But, touching on what Ninh said, that I think is something I want to leave us with that's, I believe, really important. Ninh talked about how Higg can, do benchmarking and hotspot finding and things like that for them. And that's really important. But it's also important to recognize that there's probably 100 other systems that do similar things in the world that have their own value judgment and their own value lenses. And Jeanette mentioned this earlier about this need for common methodology around how we look at the data. What I get most excited about is the fact that by having common data, you actually can support a level of divergent methodology. But because we can all get back to the core data, because we're sharing a common data pool and no one of us owns that data, right? The manufacturers own that data. People can come up with new ideas and new innovations and new ways of looking at the data. And it's transparent for all of us, right? We can all look at the same data they're looking at. We can replay their methodology. We can understand the conclusions they're drawing. And that's really going to be so important to the innovation that is going to be built on top of the SLCP, so that we don't just solve the problems of the past, but we start finding the problems of the future and solving them. And so that ability to support a divergent methodology within a common public data set, not public, but an unowned data set that's owned by the manufacturers, is just transformative. And to me, that's what is so exciting about the work we're doing, because that's where we're going to really see scale change over time.
And can I just add to that as well? Because I think we really saw during the pandemic, and this is where the whole point of what this tool is, it's an assessment during the pandemic, when a lot of physical audits were not able to happen, right? A lot of good news came out. I mean, a lot of the manufacturers were really able to use the tool and understand their own sort of what they, in terms of their own actions and how they could improve themselves. And I think it's really important, because I think it really changed the whole dimension of how we look at this going forward now. And there was we hear a lot of bad stories about the industry and manufacturing, but there were a lot of good things that we learned about ourselves that we were then able to implement. And that came from the manufacturers themselves being able to control and own the data.
Cool, thanks, Nikhil. So we've got a few more questions that we kind of prepped with the panelists, but if it's all right with you four, I'd just like to jump to some of the comments and questions in the chat box. So one person under the name Full Moon in the chat kind of is asking a couple of different things, but what I thought was most interesting was the comment that I think companies should take responsibility for training consumers in terms of their consumption patterns. Now, in terms of respectful and secure work environments, would anyone like to jump in and maybe share their thoughts on how the two are somehow connected.
I do think that there's an opportunity, and I think when we've participated in Higg, one of the ambitions has been around providing more transparency to consumers as well. I think that we still have a long ways to go when it comes to some of that work, but I think some of the actions that we take really are important to kind of talk through, you know, how are we as a company driving ethical behavior. I don't think that right now that there is a way for us to be able to communicate that, given like all the information that we're trying to share specifically around product or other elements. But I do want to share that I think a lot of this does help us provide more credibility within the supply chain. So I don't know if that really answers the question, but I can at least share, you know, at a high level intention. I think that we do have a long ways to go when it comes to addressing some of that very specific consumer information. But you know, our goal here is to ensure that we are being as transparent as possible with our factories and supply chains, as well as their performance. And so that's why tools like SLCP and other programs that we participate in are really important when it comes to helping us drive an ethical supply chain. So, but I'll pass it back to you.
Yeah, and I think also if we all are able to speak the same language, I think it'll be much easier. So everyone, there has to be this common language. There has to be this convergence in order for that to happen. So I think once that happens, then again, it makes it much easier to then communicate with the consumer. And I think we're heading in the right direction. This is what we're doing with this tool as well. But I think we're heading in the right direction for that to happen very soon.
Thank you both for, yeah, John.
Another point on that, it's not just common data formats, it's also that the data is accessible for the first time. And if you have the data being accessible with common data formats, you have that opportunity now to open up in ways that weren't possible before, I think. So I think the trend lines are going in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for trying to connect these different topics, because they're quite far apart. But I think what's really helpful for me, at least, is to like anchor this work in transparency. And John, your point around it being accessible and other points around it being factory owned, I think are super, super insightful. So thank you all for responding to that question, and thanks for asking it, of course. I've got another question here from Cassidy. How easy is it to integrate the SLCP with other supply systems or tools? Is it compatible with other tools? Can anyone speak on this? Maybe Janet or John?
I'll take a first stab at it. Yeah, so many of our customers take their SLCP data through our system or directly from other systems, and they embed it right into their back office. The data formats are super simple, really easy to understand, and compatible with pretty much any sort of platform that was built in the last 20 years. They were designed that way. They were designed to be ingestible by the larger ecosystem. So you're never going to find a file import SLCP, but if you could, do something as simple as open an Excel spreadsheet, you have access to your SLCP data, and it only scales up from there.
Maybe I can just add to that. I think what I can talk about our experience in terms of trying to manage multiple data sets, including SLCP. And so I do think there is an investment that needs to happen. Absolutely agree with John that there is accessibility, but I think you have to be able to understand, how do you want to use the information, right? Are you going to use it in its raw format, or will you be using this to compare it against your own standards? And so those are questions that as an organization, you will have to answer, right? Especially as you're trying to kind of manage various standards here as well, because a lot of the data that's coming from SLCP really is, I would say, neutral and objective data, right? And so there's some information such as international labor standards, as well as country labor laws in partnership with Better Work, that isn't necessarily neutral. There is an element to be able to understand kind of that element as well, or the judgment, I should say. But most of the information is there so that you can compare that against whatever standard you are using as well. So just want to add that I would say, although it's there, it will take some time to kind of think about and operationalize as an organization. But there's a lot of great support, especially from Higg and SLCP, in terms of how to make this happen.
Great, great. Thank you all. I think we're really appreciating these questions as well. So thank you so much. Nice one, Cassidy. I'm glad that was helpful. We've got just less than 10 minutes left of this webinar. So I'd just like to maybe pick up on one more question, then we'll round off. But thanks everyone for sharing these questions. Yeah, we've got a lot more GFA masterclasses to come in the next couple of months. So yeah, hopefully we see you there. We've got one question around the cost for manufacturers. In terms of cost sharing for implementing a system like this, would anyone like to, in the group, like to add insight on that? Maybe Nikhil from a
ultimately, if we're doing this for multiple customers, it should technically reduce our overall cost because what we were spending before. So if the same assessment, if more buyers adopt the SLCP, it should theoretically and will, I mean, it obviously reduce our overall cost of what we were doing before. And there's a lot of data that we also get from it that will, help us in our own sort of operations as well. So overall, I mean, it reduces the audit, which is audit fatigue, which is what we're trying to do with this.
Yeah.
And then obviously should theoretically reduce the cost, which it does, and I think results show that anyway.
Thank you so much for that clear answer. In which case, I'm going to wrap up this part of the discussion now just by giving all of you on the panel, and thank you so much for joining us and being so engaged with this topic and bringing it to life. But maybe a last word from each of you. It seems like, linking to Felicity's last slide in terms of policy, it feels like this era of voluntary initiatives is starting to wind down, and I just wonder what's next. Could each of you give a very brief kind of like closing comment and just looking ahead? Starting with you, John.
Yeah, definitely. I think from our perspective that, if you were leading edge over the last 2 or 3 years, managing data in this way, that's going to be the price of entry soon, we think. We think that the industry is going to have to learn very rapidly to collect this data at scale to support the emerging regulatory environment, the need to show tangible progress. And showing progress is no longer going to be a yes/no check mark on a form or a certificate that you upload to a website. It's going to be deep primary supply chain data that's owned by the factory that we all use together transparently. And that means we're all going to have to collect a lot more data, and we're going to have to work closely with our manufacturing partners to help them source it, collect it, own it, manage it, and do that alongside of us. And the best way to do that is through common standards like SLCP, scale technology, and these partnerships between institutions, corporations, and the supply chain. It's the only way we're going to scale up the data requirements to what is coming at us very, very quickly, we believe.
Ninh, your thoughts very briefly to close?
Yeah, I love that. I agree with that. I think, honestly, it's going to continue to be a standard, and we're going to continue to move deeper into the supply chain, including tier 2 and beyond. I think the quality of information is going to continue to be a focus area for us to be able to help support human rights due diligence, but also thematic areas, whether it's gender equity or improved wage systems. But I think it's also important that we continue to think about, how this data is going to continue to be able to be shared with stakeholders in order to really drive impact where we want to see this as well. So my closing comments. Thank you.
Fab. Thanks, Ninh. Janet, what are your thoughts just to close?
Yeah, fully in alignment with what has been said before. So just building up on that, I think that the crux of it is we need to collect a lot more data. The data needs to be meaningful. It means that, say what we've said, data driven is, I think, the future. Scalable sharing is also the future, but you also need the right interpretation level of how to drive the change. Data is data, but it only is valuable if there is a right interpretation with it. And I think it needs to start with the alignment against local law and the international labor conventions. That's, I think, the critical mass. And the last comment, as much as I appreciate and I'm proud of our own achievements and the collective achievements, where we're soon heading towards 10,000, 15,000 factories that are going to use this converged assessment tool and all the opportunities that come with it. We have just in the apparel sector a world of probably 100,000 factories. So that's a world to win, and we need to address and get the information from all of that. So that's going to be a huge effort. Yeah. So positive, but also a lot of opportunities still that we all need to work on together.
Thanks for that reality check, for sure. And Nikhil, what would you say to round off?
Well, I think everyone's talked about getting data. So we're also going to be getting a lot of data. What are we going to do with the data, right? And I think there are going to be a lot more stakeholders involved now, whether it's governments, etc. So I think that for me, the key for the future is how do we all work together, and how do we understand the needs of everybody, and how do we support each other to get ultimately to achieve our ultimate aim.
Thank you, absolutely. And I guess just a round off point from me is just thanks to everyone for joining, of course. And let's not forget that this work is so centered on really trying to honor the well-being of the many, many people that so desperately deserve respectful and secure work environments. And it can feel quite technical, it can feel very process or data driven, but it's at the end of the day a very human story. So for those of you in the audience who are working on this within your own jobs and businesses, do download the monitor. And yeah, thank you all so much. I'm going to hand back to Christina and for the closing comments.
Sure, and thank you, Faith, for moderating this session, and thank you guys for being there. I only have a couple of slides that I really want to show to you guys, and I think this leads right into what we just talked about. So I really want to call all of you out there, stakeholders, partners of the industry, to actually participate in this fashion industry target consultation that is a project led by GFA and UNIP, where we try and identify and converge existing industry targets, which is much in line with a lot of what we just talked about. So the deadline for taking part in this is now 10th of February, and we will share the link in the chat for you guys to sign up if you're interested. And we will also share it on email afterwards together with a recording of this session. And on another note, so we have talked a lot about the monitor in general, specifically on the first priority, but we have 4 more priorities to cover from the CEO agenda and then in the monitor. And these 4 priorities will be in 4 different masterclasses, 1 for each month. So we will also share the links to all of these, and really hoping that you guys want to join again. We're really looking forward to it, and we'll launch the next speaker lineup for all of them. And on a final note, Global Fashion Agenda, we have our annual Global Fashion Summit in Copenhagen on the 27th and 28th of June. And we can say that tickets and the theme will be launched very, very, very soon. So cross the dates in your calendar, and we hope to see you there. So I would say that that's all from me. And you?
Yeah. Thanks everyone in the audience. Thank you to our speakers and partners who have all, of course, inputted into the monitor itself and today. So
yes,
thank you
so much, guys. So it's cold here in Copenhagen and dark outside, so we better get out. Enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.